I'm going to aim high and pretend that the White House Historical Association has asked me to speak on James Garfield and his assassination in 1881 and the subsequent newspaper coverage of not just his assassination and death and aftermath, but also the trial of Charles Guiteau. It's likely that few people actually remember James Garfield or his assassination from the other three, Lincoln, Kennedy, and McKinley. However, newspaper articles covering the assassination and Guiteau's trials provide a dramatic narrative to not only the events of this tragedy, but the circus of a trial. They read like a Hollywood movie script waiting to be published. The assassination of James Garfield is a compelling story worthy of a movie, if not at least a limited series on Netflix or Amazon. James Garfield was, as one writer called him, the what if president. What might he have done had he lived longer? He only served for maybe around 200 days as president. He was determined to reform the American civil service and push for civil rights for African Americans, even advocating to build more schools in the South when he was in the House of Representatives. However, on July 2nd, 1881, a deranged office seeker, Charles Guiteau, removed the president from office. It's possible that Garfield could have survived the actual shooting had the doctors left well enough alone. Unfortunately, it occurred on the edge of Pasteur's germ theory and Lister's use of antiseptics. Those were being practiced in Europe, but were not widely taught in the United States at this point. A couple of years later, if this would have happened, Garfield may have lived. But as it was, his doctors kept sticking their grimy fingers into his wound, introducing infection, which, as Guiteau responded in his cross-examination at trial, finished the work. Newspapers immediately covered the details of the initial assassination attempt, Guiteau's arrest, cabinet member reactions, and even how Garfield was faring in the White House. Eyewitness interviews and Guiteau's publicized testimony in court detail how he believed that God, or as he referred to him as the deity due to his Oneida background, inspired him to, quote, remove the president, as he preferred to call it rather than murder, of the United States to save the Republican Party and the nation. Eyewitnesses in Guiteau discussed how he stalked the president, first for a patronage position for the consulship in France, for which he was completely unqualified, and then to carry out the murder. Guiteau was a narcissist who, despite all evidence to the contrary, believed that he was friends with Garfield and Secretary of State James G. Blaine. However, even in his testimony, it is obvious that these men did not like him. They viewed him as insane and avoided him at all costs. James Blaine even went so far as to tell Guiteau, he yelled at him to leave him alone. Additionally, the newspapers published Guiteau's court testimony where he admitted to stalking Garfield for weeks looking to find the perfect opportunity to kill him. He considered the church, because what better time could exist but when a man is at his devotions, but chose not to because it might hurt somebody else. Another time he chose not to shoot because Mrs. Garfield was with President Garfield and he didn't want to upset her. Eyewitnesses and police who were interviewed gave their experiences with and impressions of Guiteau. One of Garfield's police officers recalled that Guiteau shouted, "I am a stalwart. The president is dead. Chester Arthur is president," or something along those lines. In an interview with The Sun out of Baltimore, another police officer remarked about the peculiarity of all murderers that their eyes are set far apart, and Guiteau proves no exception to the rule. The coverage in the New York Times provided heartfelt accounts of how Garfield's son James began sobbing at his father's bedside, and Garfield responded, "Jimmy, my son, hope for the best." In another Times article, he told his son, "Don't be alarmed, Jimmy. The upper story is all right. It's only the hole that's a little damaged." Secretary of War Robert Todd Lincoln, the only surviving son of Abraham Lincoln, remained at the White House with Garfield and remarked, "My God, how many hours of sorrow I have seen in this town." Guiteau's trial and interviews demonstrate an unhinged man who believed that people would remember him not as an assassin, but as a patriot carrying out the will of God to save the Republican Party and the nation, that they would thank him. Reading about the assassination, aftermath, and trial in secondary accounts, history books, it's interesting, but there's nothing like reading the dramatic newspaper coverage of this event. My husband and I were completely taken in by this story from start to finish.